The council chamber stretched out like a small moon. 847 different species filled the massive space. Some floated in water tanks. Others hung from the ceiling with wings spread wide. The crystal beings stood perfectly, still while the gas creatures moved in slow, colorful clouds. Daeho Kim sat in the human section and watched it all. He wore a simple blue uniform that looked plain next to the glowing robes and metal armor around him. Next to him, Hyejin Park typed quietly on her tablet. She was recording everything, as always. The Velkari speaker stood at the center podium. Its 4 arms moved in perfect patterns as it talked about mathematics that could bend space. The numbers it showed on the giant screens made other species gasp in wonder. Even the ancient Dominion members nodded with respect. "Impressive," whispered So-Young Choi, the human trade coordinator. She sat behind Daeho with a stack of data tablets. "But their math won't help the Thornids get food to their outer colonies." Daeho smiled a little. So-Young was right. The Velkari were amazing at theory, but they never thought about practical things, like how to actually move food across space without it spoiling. That was a human problem to solve. His earpiece buzzed softly. "Sir," came Jin-Woo Lee's voice from the Human Coordination Center, "the Nexari are fighting with the crystalline hegemony. Again, something about mining rights. Same asteroid belt as last month?" Daeho asked quietly. "Yes, sir. They both think they own it." Daeho sighed. The Nexari and crystalline hegemony had this same fight every few weeks. Neither species remembered that they had agreed to share the belt. They just saw rocks they wanted and started arguing. "Send them the sharing agreement we wrote. The one with the pretty pictures." "Already done, sir. They're calming down now." On the main stage, a Thornid was now speaking. It looked like a walking tree with too many branches. Its voice sounded like wind through leaves as it talked about growing new kinds of plants that could live in any environment. The other species clapped their various appendages. The Thornids were masters of biology. They could make plants grow, anywhere, even in space. But Hyejin knew something the others didn't. 3 Thornid colonies were dying because they couldn't figure out how to grow food in their specific soil. She had sent them simple farming tips last week. Tips that any human farmer would know. Taemin Yoon leaned over to whisper in her ear. "The supply convoy to Sector 7 is 3 days late." "Which one?" Hyejin asked. "The medical supplies for the Velkari research station." Hyejin nodded. The Velkari were brilliant, but they always forgot to order basic things like bandages and medicine. They would figure out how to build a new star, then die from a simple cut because they had no first aid supplies. Reroute the convoy from Sector 12. They have extra. "Already done," Taemin said with a small smile. The presentations continued. Each species showed off their greatest achievements. The gas beings had learned to control weather on entire planets. The metal creatures could build machines that worked for thousands of years. The flying species had mapped every star in 3 galaxies, but while they talked, the humans worked. Jin-Woo managed 17 different crisis situations from his station in the back. 2 trade disputes, 4 territorial arguments, 3 technical failures, 5 supply shortages, and 3 diplomatic incidents that could start wars if handled badly. His fingers moved quickly across multiple screens, sending messages, making calls, and solving problems. Most species didn't even know these problems existed. They were busy with their grand projects and important research. They left the small stuff to others, usually to humans. "The Dominion Chancellor wants to make a speech," Daeho's assistant whispered to him. Daeho looked up at the ancient being on the central platform. Supreme Chancellor Vexathara was old when humans were still living in caves. Her species had ruled parts of the galaxy for millions of years. When she spoke, everyone listened. But even as she began her speech about the glory of galactic civilization, Hyejin was busy preventing a disaster. The life support system on Research Station Alpha 7 was failing. The station held scientists from 12 different species. If the system died, they would all suffocate in hours. The station's own engineers couldn't figure out the problem. The Nexari said it was a crystal resonance issue. The Velkari said the mathematics were impossible. The Thornids wanted to grow, plants to make oxygen, but that would take weeks. Hyejin looked at the data and saw the real problem. Someone had changed the air mixture settings by mistake. She sent a simple fix. Turn dial 7 back to the original position. The crisis was over in 10 minutes. None of the species on the station ever knew how close they came to dying. They just noticed that the air got better and went back to their important work. Across the chamber, similar scenes played out constantly. Human technicians fixed broken equipment that other species thought was unfixable. Human diplomats solved arguments that had been going on for decades. Human coordinators made sure that the thousands of different systems needed to run galactic civilization actually worked together. The irony was lost on most species. They saw humans as the newest, most primitive members of the Council. Humans had no special powers. They couldn't control weather or bend space or live for millions of years. They were just ordinary. What they didn't see was that humans had a gift for making things work. While other species focused on their specialties, humans saw the big picture. They understood how all the pieces fit together. They could talk to anyone, work with everyone, and solve problems that others didn't even notice. As Chancellor Vexathara finished her grand speech about galactic unity, So-Young quietly solved a trade crisis that would have left 6 species without essential supplies. As the Velkari demonstrated their newest mathematical breakthrough, Jin Wu prevented a war between 2 minor species over a misunderstood message. The council session ended with great ceremony. Species congratulated each other on their achievements. They made plans for grand projects that would take centuries to complete. They spoke of the bright future of galactic civilization. Meanwhile, the humans packed up their simple equipment and prepared for another day of actually making that civilization work. They would return to their offices and workshops, their coordination centers, and diplomatic stations. They would continue to be the invisible foundation that held everything together. None of them knew that in just a few days, their quiet, essential work would be dismissed as worthless. None of them could imagine that the greatest crisis in galactic history was about to begin with a few careless words and wounded pride. The emergency session had been called to discuss the great infrastructure project. It was supposed to be the largest construction in galactic history. New hyperspace routes would connect distant galaxies. Trade would flow easier. Communication would be faster. Everyone would benefit. Dae-Ho Kim presented humanity's proposal from the central podium. His voice was calm and steady as he explained the logistics plan. "The key is coordination," he said, showing charts on the massive display. "We need to think about supply lines, worker safety, and backup systems. If we build too fast without proper support, the whole project could fail." The human plan was detailed and practical. It showed how to move millions of workers safely across space, how to get food and supplies to construction sites in distant galaxies, how to prevent the dozens of different species from accidentally starting fights while working together. But the presentation felt flat compared to the others. The Velkari had shown beautiful mathematical models that made space itself dance. The crystalline hegemony had demonstrated matter converters that could build anything from stardust. The Thornids had grown living ships that could repair themselves. Humanity offered spreadsheets and safety protocols. When Dae-Ho finished, the chamber was quiet. Too quiet. He could see the expressions on the faces around him. Some looked bored. Others seemed annoyed that their time had been wasted. Supreme Chancellor Vexathara rose from her ancient seat. Her voice carried the weight of millions of years. When she spoke, "The Council appreciates all contributions," she began, but her tone suggested otherwise. "However, We must be realistic about capabilities and experience. She gestured toward the human section with one of her 4 arms. Our newest members show enthusiasm, but perhaps primitive species should observe and learn rather than waste the Council's time with amateur suggestions. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. Daeho felt his face grow hot. Around him, he could hear Hyejin's sharp intake of breath and So Young's quiet gasp. But Vexathara wasn't finished. The infrastructure project requires advanced thinking. From advanced civilizations. This is not a job for species who have barely learned to leave their home planet. The Velkari mathematician Quindar stood up, his 4 arms moving in agreement patterns. The Chancellor speaks wisdom. Humans should be grateful for the opportunity to witness superior civilizations at work. Their basic observations might be useful for simple tasks, but real planning requires real intelligence. Laughter rippled through parts of the chamber. Not cruel laughter, but the kind that dismissed something as mildly amusing and completely unimportant. The Nexari representative joined in. Perhaps humans could handle cleaning duties or basic maintenance while the actual construction happens. Every project needs someone to carry supplies. More agreement from the assembled species. The Thornids suggested humans might be good at growing food for the real workers. The gas beings thought humans could monitor simple systems that didn't require complex understanding. Daeho stood frozen at the podium. 200 years of human contribution to the Council was being dismissed as worthless. All the problems they had solved, all the crises they had prevented, all the quiet work that kept civilization running, none of it mattered. Behind him, Hyejin watched her life's work being reduced to basic observations. She had spent decades studying xenobiology, creating medical treatments that had saved millions of lives across dozens of species. Her research had prevented plagues, solved fertility crises, and helped species adapt to new environments. The assembled aliens saw it as simple note-taking that anyone could do. Jinwoo felt his earpiece buzzing frantically. Multiple crisis alerts were coming in from across the galaxy. The Thorian-Velkari border dispute was heating up again. The Nexari quantum network was showing signs of cascade failure. 3 major trade routes were experiencing delays that could snowball into economic disaster. Normally, he would immediately start coordinating responses. He would send diplomatic teams to calm the Thorians and Velkari. He would dispatch technical experts to stabilize the quantum network. He would reroute cargo ships to prevent the trade crisis. Instead, he sat in his chair and watched the species who thought humans were worthless face problems they couldn't solve without human help. The debate continued. Species after species agreed that humans were too primitive for important work. Some suggested reducing human voting rights. Others proposed limiting human participation to appropriate roles like maintenance and supply management. "They're not wrong about one thing," Taemin whispered to So Young. "We are good at maintenance and supply management. We're so good at it that they don't even know we're doing it." So Young nodded grimly. Her tablet was showing supply chain failures, cascading across 17 sectors. Without human coordination, the complex web of interspecies trade was starting to tangle. Ships were arriving at wrong destinations. Payments were being sent to incorrect accounts. Essential supplies were sitting in warehouses while distant colonies ran out of food. She had the power to fix it all with a few commands. But why should she? These species thought human work was worthless. Chancellor Vexathara called for a formal vote on humanity's role in the infrastructure project. The results were predictable. Humans would be allowed to participate in support roles only. No planning, no decision-making, no real contribution. Daeho felt something change inside him. Not anger exactly, more like a door closing. He thought about Jinwoo working 18-hour days to prevent wars, about Hyejin developing cures for diseases that affected species who now called her work basic observations. about Taimin ensuring that food reached hungry colonies while those same colonies voted to exclude humans from important decisions. He thought about all the human technicians maintaining council systems, all the human coordinators solving problems. Before they became visible, all the human diplomats preventing conflicts that could destroy civilizations. And he thought about how none of it was appreciated, how it was all seen as simple work that anyone could do. The vote finished. The results appeared on the main display. Humans would have no real role in the greatest project in galactic history. Daiho made a decision that would change everything. He stood up slowly and activated his microphone. The chamber fell quiet, waiting to hear the humans accept their reduced role with appropriate gratitude. Instead, Daiho spoke 5 words that would echo through history. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council. The silence that followed was complete. Even the gas beings stopped their constant motion. Effective immediately, Daiho continued, his voice steady and clear. All human personnel will cease council activities and return to Earth space. All human-managed systems will be transferred to council control. All human-mediated agreements will require new oversight. He gestured to the human delegation. We wish the council success in their advanced planning and superior intelligence. Ye-Jin stood first, followed by So-Young, then Jin-Woo, then Tai-Min. One by one, every human in the chamber rose and began walking toward the exits. "Wait!" called Quindar, sounding confused. "Where are you going? You can't just leave." Daiho paused at the chamber door. "You're right. We're too primitive to understand important things. So we'll go back to our simple planet and leave the complex work to our superiors." As the humans left, Jin-Woo's tablet showed 18 new crisis alerts. The Thorian-Velkari situation was approaching the breaking point. The Nexari network was minutes from total failure. Supply chains were collapsing across multiple sectors. For the first time in 2 centuries, humanity would not be there to fix the problems. In the council chamber, the remaining species began to realize they might have made a mistake. But it was too late. The humans were gone, and they had taken something essential with them. Something the galaxy was about to discover it could not live without. The first sign of trouble came exactly 72 hours after the humans left. Ambassador Kethron of the Thorian Republic was in his private quarters when the alarms started. His species looked like walking crystals, and the high-pitched sound made his entire body vibrate uncomfortably. He rushed to his communication center and activated the emergency channel. "What is the meaning of this noise?" he demanded. The answer came from General Velkoth of the Velkari Military Command. "Your ships have crossed into Velkari space without permission. This is an act of war." Kethron's crystal surface flickered with confusion. "Impossible. Our ships are on scheduled trade routes approved by the Council." "No such approval exists in our records," Velkoth replied coldly. Both species scrambled to check their files. The Thorians found documents showing clear permission to use the disputed space route. The Velkari found documents stating that the route was strictly forbidden to Thorian vessels. Neither set of documents matched. What neither species knew was that Jin-Woo Lee had been managing their communications for the past century. Every few months, the Thorians and Velkari would start this same argument. Jin-Woo would quietly update both sets of records, adjust the trade schedules, and send carefully worded messages that made both sides think they had won. Without Jin-Woo's invisible management, the old hatreds between the species erupted like a dam bursting. Within hours, Thorian and Velkari warships were facing each other across the disputed border. Both sides demanded the other back down. Both sides were certain they were in the right. Neither side remembered that a human diplomat had been preventing this exact situation for decades. The shooting started on the second day. At the same time, on the far side of the galaxy, the Nexari quantum communication network began to collapse. Chief Engineer Ziktha stared at his control panels in disbelief. The quantum crystals that carried messages across impossible distances were going dark, one by one. Each failure caused more failures, spreading like a disease through the network. "Run full diagnostics," he ordered his team. "Already running, sir," came the reply. "All systems show optimal function. The mathematics are perfect. There is no logical reason for this cascade failure." But there was a reason. For the past 40 years, Hyojin Park had been making tiny adjustments to the quantum resonance frequencies. Not because anything was wrong, but because she understood something the Nexari didn't. The network was slowly drifting out of balance, like a guitar string going out of tune. The Nexari were masters of quantum physics, but they thought in terms of perfect systems. They built their network to mathematical perfection and assumed it would stay that way forever. They didn't understand that perfect systems in an imperfect universe needed constant small corrections. Hyojin had been providing those corrections without being asked. She never bothered to explain what she was doing because the Nexari never asked. They just noticed that their network worked perfectly and assumed it was because of their superior engineering. Now, without her quiet maintenance, the network was remembering that it had been slowly breaking for decades. As communication links failed across the galaxy, the economic crisis began. Tai Min Yoon had been managing supply chains for 200 civilizations. Not officially. No one had asked him to do it. But he had noticed that the various species were terrible at coordinating with each other. The crystalline hegemony would order rare metals from the Thornids, but they would send the order in crystal format, messages that the plant beings couldn't read. The Velkari would calculate perfect delivery schedules, but forget to account for the fact that gas-being ships moved differently than solid matter ships. So Taemin had quietly started translating orders, adjusting schedules, and making sure that cargo arrived where it was needed when it was needed. He had become the invisible hub of galactic commerce. With Taemin gone, 2 centuries of carefully balanced trade began to unravel. The first crisis hit the Outer Rim colonies. Food shipments that should have arrived from the Thornid agricultural worlds never appeared. The ships had been sent, but to the wrong destinations. The Thornids had used their old delivery schedules, not knowing that Taemin had been quietly updating them every few months. On 17 different worlds, colonists began rationing food. The crystalline hegemony's star forges started shutting down when essential metals failed to arrive. The Velkari research stations went dark when their power crystals ran out, and replacement shipments went to the wrong sector. Meanwhile, the Council Station itself was dying. Chief Engineer Malthy walked through corridors that had been pristine for centuries and tried to understand what was happening. Life support systems were failing in random patterns. Artificial gravity flickered on and off. The central computer kept losing files and forgetting basic commands. "Have we been attacked?" he asked his team. "Is this sabotage?" His engineers ran every scan they could think of. No signs of attack, no evidence of sabotage. The systems were simply breaking. What Malthy didn't know was that a dozen human technicians had been quietly maintaining the station for decades. Not because they were assigned to do it, but because they had noticed problems that no one else saw. The artificial gravity generator had a resonance issue that needed adjustment every few days. The life support system had a memory leak that required regular resets. The central computer had compatibility problems between software created by different species. Problems that only showed up when the system was under stress. The humans had been handling all of these maintenance tasks without being asked. They saw problems, they fixed problems, they moved on to the next problem. It was so natural to them that they never thought to mention it. The other species had never noticed the problems because the problems were always fixed before they became visible. Now, for the first time in centuries, the station was running without human maintenance. All the small problems that had been quietly solved for decades suddenly emerged at once. As life support began failing in critical areas, Chancellor Vexithara called an emergency session. The response was chaos. Half the expected delegates couldn't attend because their ships had broken down or gotten lost. Others arrived to find their quarters without power or air. "How is this possible?" Vexathera demanded. "This station has run perfectly for millennia." The Nexari engineer tried to explain the quantum cascade failure, but his communication equipment kept cutting out. The Velkari attempted to present mathematical models of the crisis, but their data files had been corrupted. The Thornids wanted to offer biological solutions, but their environmental samples had been contaminated by the life support failures. For the first time in Council history, species that had worked together for thousands of years couldn't even communicate properly with each other. In the back of the chamber, a small group of lesser species huddled together. They were the ones who had worked closest with humans. They understood what was happening. The humans weren't just council members, whispered Ambassador Prex of the mining consortium. They were the glue holding everything together. But they were so primitive, protested a Velkari observer. They had no special abilities. No, said Prex sadly. They had the most special ability of all. They knew how to make things work, as if to emphasize his point, the lights in the chamber flickered and went out. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light. In the distance, alarms began to sound as more systems failed. The greatest civilization in galactic history was coming apart, and the species that had built it couldn't understand why. They were about to learn that there was a difference between being intelligent and being wise, between creating great things and maintaining them, between knowing how things should work and making them actually work. The humans had tried to teach them these lessons for 2 centuries. Now they were learning them the hard way. 2 weeks after humanity's withdrawal, the Velkari Computational Center faced an impossible problem. Master Calculator Hrendal stared at the equations floating in the holographic display. They were perfect. Every variable accounted for, every calculation verified 17 times by the greatest mathematical minds in the galaxy. The resource distribution algorithm should work flawlessly, but it didn't work at all. "The mathematics are correct," Hrendal said for the 100th time. "The optimization is perfect. Why are the cargo ships arriving empty at stations that desperately need supplies?" His assistant, Yexthon, manipulated the display with 6 delicate arms. "Perhaps we need more variables? More precise calculations?" Hrendal's 4 eyes blinked in frustration. "We have already included 847 species specifications, 12,000 different resource types, 50,000 shipping routes, and 200,000 individual preferences. What more could we possibly need?" What they needed was Jinwoo Lee sitting in a small office, drinking coffee, and making gut decisions based on 20 years of experience. The humans had never tried to solve resource distribution through pure mathematics. They had learned that Thornid shipping captains got nervous during certain stellar alignments and would delay trips. That crystalline hegemony miners worked faster when they got their favorite music crystals with their tool shipments. That Nexari technicians would refuse to work if their food arrived even slightly warm. These weren't variables you could put in equations. They were the messy, illogical, completely unpredictable aspects of dealing with living beings. Humans understood them instinctively. The Velkari couldn't even see them. So while the Velkari created perfect mathematical models, cargo ships continued to arrive at the wrong places with the wrong supplies for the wrong species. Across the galaxy, the breakdown accelerated. The Thornid agricultural worlds were producing record harvests, but their food was rotting in warehouses. The distribution system that Taemin had carefully maintained was completely broken. Ships meant to carry grain to hungry colonies were instead carrying luxury items to species that didn't want them. On the mining world of Kethtar, the crystalline hegemony faced a crisis they had never imagined. Their star forges needed 17 different rare metals to function. Before, these metals had arrived regularly, delivered by a complex network of trade agreements. Now the metals weren't coming. Forge Master Shankite tried to contact the suppliers directly. The communication took days because the Nexari quantum network was still failing. When he finally reached the mining operations, he discovered a maze of confusion. "We sent your metals," insisted the Nexari mine coordinator. "3 shipments last week." "We received no metals," Shankite replied. "Only crystallized gases that we cannot use. Check your delivery codes. Shipment reference 847 Alpha Nexus 7, Shankite." Checked his records. "That code does not exist in our system." What neither of them knew was that So Young Choi had been translating between their incompatible identification systems for decades. The Nexari used quantum encrypted reference codes. The crystalline hegemony used mineral matrix identifiers. The two systems had nothing in common. So Young had created a translation database that converted between hundreds of different coding systems used by different species. She had updated it constantly as new systems were developed. She had shared it with no one because no one had asked for it. Without her translations, trade agreements became meaningless strings of symbols that different species couldn't understand. The economic collapse spread like a plague. Species that had specialized their entire civilizations around single exports found themselves unable to trade for basic necessities. The gas beings could control weather, but couldn't grow food. The Thornids could grow anything but couldn't manufacture tools. The metal species could build incredible machines, but couldn't create the software to run them. For thousands of years, this specialization had been a strength. Each species did what they did best and traded for everything else. The system had worked perfectly because humans had been quietly managing the incredibly complex logistics that made it possible. Now the system was collapsing, and the specialized species couldn't adapt quickly enough to survive. Wars broke out everywhere. The Thorian-Velkari conflict had escalated from border skirmishes to full-scale battles. Both sides were convinced the other was deliberately disrupting supply lines and sabotaging communication networks. Neither side understood that the disruptions were caused by the absence of human mediation. The crystalline hegemony declared war on the Nexari over mining rights they had been peacefully sharing for centuries. Without human negotiators to resolve, their monthly disputes, small disagreements, had grown into major conflicts. Even species that had been allies for millennia turned against each other. The gas beings accused the Thornids of deliberately poisoning atmospheric processors. The Thornids accused the metal species of stealing agricultural technology. Everyone blamed everyone else for the cascade of failures. The truth was that no one was sabotaging anything. The galaxy's civilizations were simply discovering how much they had depended on human coordination. Chancellor Vexithara watched the reports flood in from her emergency command center. Half the council station had been evacuated when life support failed completely. The remaining section was running on backup power that wouldn't last much longer. "How many wars?" she asked wearily. 47 active conflicts, reported her aide. 18 more beginning in the next few days. Economic collapse in 60% of member systems. Complete communication breakdown in 30%. Vexithara had lived for millions of years. She had seen civilizations rise and fall, but she had never seen anything like this. An entire galactic society was disintegrating in real time, not because of war or disaster, but because it had lost the species that made everything work. "The humans," she said quietly. "We need to contact the humans." "We have tried, Chancellor. Earth responds only with automated messages directing us to contact local council representatives." "What local representatives? The council is falling apart." That was the bitter irony. The council had been so dependent on human coordination that, without humans, there was no effective council to coordinate anything. The final blow came when the council station's central computer completely crashed. Malthy and his team had been working around the clock for weeks, trying to keep critical systems running. But the cascade failures had finally overwhelmed everything. "We have to evacuate," Malthy announced. Life support will fail completely within hours. As ships launched from the dying station, carrying the last remnants of galactic government, Vexathara made a decision that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. She ordered her personal ship to set course for Earth. The species that had dismissed humans as primitive were about to beg them for help. The greatest civilization in galactic history was collapsing, and only the inferior humans knew how to put it back together. But the question remained. After being insulted and dismissed, would humanity even be willing to help? As her ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving the dark and lifeless Council station behind, Vexathara realized she was about to find out if the species they had treated as children were mature enough to forgive their parents' mistakes. The survival of the galaxy might depend on human mercy being stronger than human pride. 6 months after humanity's withdrawal, Admiral Sujin Han stood in her office overlooking the Pacific Ocean and watched the stars. Earth looked peaceful from here. No wars, no collapsing economies, no desperate refugees fleeing dying worlds. Just blue water and quiet skies. Her computer chimed softly. Another message from the Galactic Coalition. The 47th this week. She didn't open it immediately. She knew what it would say. The same thing they all said. Please help us, we're sorry, we'll give you anything you want. The irony wasn't lost on her. 6 months ago, these same species had called humans primitive and worthless. Now they were begging for human assistance, as their civilization fell apart. Sujin finally opened the message. It was from Chancellor Vexathara herself, sent from a refugee ship drifting somewhere in the Outer Rim. The once mighty leader of galactic civilization was now homeless. Her government scattered, her council station dark and dead. Admiral Han, the message began, I write to you from the ruins of everything we built. Our pride has cost us dearly. We humbly request a meeting to discuss terms for human assistance in rebuilding galactic civilization. Sujin almost smiled. Humbly request. From a being who had spent millions of years believing she was superior to every other species in the galaxy. The door to her office opened, and General Kyung-min Park entered. He was Sujin's chief advisor and one of the few humans who had argued against withdrawing from the Council. The Coalition fleet has arrived in the outer system, he reported. 17 ships representing what's left of galactic government. They're requesting permission to approach Earth. What do you think? Sujin asked. Kyung-min sat down across from her desk. I think they're desperate. Half the galaxy is at war, the other half is starving, and they have no idea how to fix any of it. Should we help them? That's not the right question, Kyung-min said. The right question is, can we trust them not to make the same mistakes? Again? Sujin nodded. It was the question that had been keeping her awake at night. Humanity had tried for 2 centuries to be good partners in galactic civilization. They had worked tirelessly to solve problems, prevent conflicts, and keep everything running smoothly, and they had been dismissed as worthless for their efforts. If humans helped rebuild, what would stop the other species from taking their contributions for granted again? Grant them permission to approach, Sujin said finally, but they come to the Luna station, not Earth, and minimal escort only. 3 days later, Sujin found herself in the sterile conference room of Luna Station, facing a delegation of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. They looked nothing like the proud, dismissive leaders she remembered from the council chambers. Chancellor Vexathara was the most changed. Her ancient features showed something Sujin had never seen before: genuine humility. The being who had ruled for millions of years looked small and tired. Admiral Han, Vexathara began, we have come to acknowledge our mistakes and request your aid. What mistakes? Sujin asked bluntly. The question seemed to surprise the delegation. They had probably expected polite diplomatic language, not direct confrontation. Vexathara straightened slightly. We underestimated human contributions to galactic society. Try again, Sujin said. What exactly did you do wrong? This time, it was Quindar, the Velkari mathematician, who answered. We called you primitive. We dismissed your work as worthless. We treated you as inferiors when you were actually—" He paused, struggling with the words. Essential. Essential how? You made everything work, whispered Ambassador Kethron of the Thorians. We were so focused on our own specialties that we never learned how to coordinate with others. You did that for us. You were the foundation that held galactic civilization together. Su-Jin studied their faces. She saw genuine regret, real understanding of what they had lost. But she also saw desperation. They needed human help to survive, and they would say anything to get it. Tell me about the current situation, she said. The reports were worse than Su-Jin had imagined. 73 active wars, complete economic collapse in most sectors, billions of refugees with nowhere to go. Entire species facing extinction because they couldn't adapt quickly enough to the breakdown of interstellar trade. We tried to rebuild the systems ourselves, Vexathera explained. But we lacked the knowledge. The Velkari created perfect mathematical models that don't work in reality. The Nexari built new quantum networks that fail for reasons we can't understand. We can't even establish basic communication between species anymore. How many have died? Su-Jin asked quietly. The silence that followed was answer enough. We estimate trillions, Quindar said finally, and the number grows every day. Su-Jin felt the weight of those deaths. If humanity had stayed, if they had swallowed their pride and continued their thankless work, those people would still be alive. But that wasn't fair, and she knew it. Humanity had tried for 2 centuries to contribute as equals. They had been told repeatedly that their contributions were worthless. They had every right to leave. What exactly are you asking for? Su-Jin said. Your return to the council, Vexathara replied. Full restoration of your position. We'll give you anything you want. Technology, territory, resources. Name your price. Su-Jin shook her head. You still don't understand. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We never did. We just wanted to be respected partners. Then what do you want? Su-Jin had been thinking about this question for months. What would it take to rebuild galactic civilization in a way that wouldn't collapse again? First, she said, formal acknowledgement from every surviving species that galactic civilization depends on cooperation, not just individual excellence. Second, establishment of permanent human-led coordination offices in every major system. Third, mandatory cross-species training programs so that other species learn to maintain the systems they depend on. Done, Vexathera said immediately. I'm not finished. Fourth, a new council structure where no single species or group of species can dismiss the contributions of others. Fifth, shared control of all critical infrastructure. And sixth, Su-Jin paused, a guarantee that this will never happen again. How can we guarantee that? By remembering, Su-Jin said simply. By teaching your children what really happened. Here, by never again taking cooperation for granted. The delegation conferred quietly among themselves. When they turned back to Su-Jin, she could see they had reached a decision. We accept all your terms, Vexathara said. But please, how quickly can you begin helping? People are dying every day. Su-Jin looked out the window at Earth. On the blue planet below, human coordination teams were already preparing for deployment. Ships were being loaded with supplies. Engineers were updating their crisis management protocols. Despite everything that had happened, humanity was ready to help. The first relief ships launch tomorrow, Su-Jin said. Full coordination teams will be deployed within a week. But understand this. We're not just fixing your problems. We're building something new. Something that won't collapse the moment one species gets angry and leaves. As the delegation prepared to return to their ships, Vexathara approached Su-Jin privately. Why? The ancient being asked. After everything we said, everything we did, why are you helping us? Su-Jin considered the question. because that's what humans do. We see problems. We fix them. We see people suffering. We help them. It's not because we're superior to you. It's because we learned something you forgot. What's that? That civilization isn't about being the smartest or the strongest or the most advanced. It's about working together. It's about understanding that everyone has value, even if that value isn't obvious. It's about building something larger than any one species could create alone. Su-Jin turned back to the window and the blue planet beyond. You called us primitive. Maybe we are. But sometimes being primitive means remembering what really matters. As the alien ships departed Luna Station, carrying the first human relief, teams back to the shattered galaxy, Su-Jin allowed herself a small smile. Humanity was going back to do what they did best, making impossible things work, but this time they would do it as equals. This time, their contributions would be recognized and valued. This time, galactic civilization would be built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than individual pride. The universe had collapsed when humans withdrew. Now it would rise again, stronger than before because everyone finally understood what humans had been trying to teach them all along. Sometimes the most important strength is the one that holds everything else together.